Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my pleasure to welcome today Gavin from Descartes Systems Group, who is the VP of Supply Chain Compliance there. And we're going to talk about important updates on cargo security and customs compliance. There's a lot going on in that section of the industry. And it's something that and there's new things that are coming up as well that shippers and 3PLs need to be aware about. So I thought this would be a good topic to really talk about today, and hopefully get you, the audience, involved in the conversation as well. Just as a reminder, if you want to submit a question, you hit the submit a question button, and I'll keep an eye on it and try to weave any good questions into the conversation. And if any of you are logged in as a guest, just a reminder that you do need to register before you can ask a question. So with that, Kevin, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you, Adrian. Wow, good to be here.
Great. Before we kind of dive into the conversation, I always like to ask my guests, how they got involved, in the industry. So, tell us a little bit about your career path. How you first got involved with supply chain and logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are as the VP of Supply Chain Compliance. What does that mean? There at Descartes.
Well, thanks, Adrian. Well, my background, I was in the service and was a diesel mechanic and a boat captain back in the late 70s. When I got out of the service, I used the GI Bill to go to college for computer programming. And a good friend of mine wound up getting me a job for a banking company doing software. So then I started my career about 3 years later with a company that's now called Keywill. I worked for them for 5 years in transportation and logistics. Started my own company in 1990, ran that for 17 years, pretty much developing web-based applications for compliance and supply chain management. In 2006, I got bought by a company called IES out of New Jersey, and spent from 2006 to last year under their employ, and then in came Descartes and bought that company, and I now am an employee. I call it getting traded to the Canadians, right? So now I'm part of Descartes, and I'm the VP of Supply Chain Compliance, and I have a lot of web-based applications that are used for security filings under my umbrella.
Great. Now, in terms of when you look at cargo security and customs compliance, I mean, that was the area that you started focusing on, as part of your software experience. I mean, how and why did you get them? Kind of why was that an attractive area to focus on when you started getting into the industry?
Okay, well, back in, I guess, around 97, when the internet became the, looked to me like it would be the primary vehicle for transportation and logistics companies to communicate, we started to develop web-based apps for purchase order management, shipment management on the web. And then, of course, we all know what happened towards the end of 2001 with September 11th. That kind of changed the whole game, and many of the things that happened after that caused us to write security-based filing software, and that became a whole market for us that was much larger than just servicing the supply chain side.
Great. So let's talk about some of the changes that you've seen. I mean, I know when I really started paying more attention to trade compliance and cargo security was really after 9/11. I mean, I think that was such a a catalyst for companies and everyone across the supply chain around to kind of take a close look at existing processes, existing technology around this area. At a high level, what have been some of the biggest changes you've seen in cargo security, customs compliance, over the past decade, and what impact has that had on shippers and logistics service providers?
Well, if you think back to, the late 90s, there was, it was just a booming time, right? There was 9% container growth a year, into the U.S. Air freight was booming, and there was really, even though we knew there were threats, prior to 9/11, there wasn't much really being done about it. It's hard to, before some kind of catalyst event happens, to go say, hey, we need to have a more secure supply chain. So it was really more about just driving the economy forward. And then, so there was a lot of growth back in the late 1990s. You think about all the dot-com boom. There must have been 100 companies all trying to do what Descartes now does today. And, Descartes came out of that time frame, but is one of the few survivors that have thrived, from a small company to now $150 million in revenue. So quite a success story on their part. So once we get post September 11th, Congress gets together, they make some laws that say we have to secure a supply chain. And, and really the first thing that happened was the AMS 24-hour rule, which, if those of us on the call here that remember back that far, it was like absolutely couldn't be done. There's no way that we could tell you what cargo is going to be on a vessel 24 hours before it sails. And, and that all turned out to be a lot of talk, and it was able to be engineered and delivered. And now it seems like that's normal, right? What is normal, right? And as we go through the last 10 years, you started with the U.S. program for Ocean AMS. Then came, the air side of the same program. And then came the truck side of that same program. And then came ISF filings for importer security filings, So we've gone through this progression over the last 10 years that has taken ocean, air, truck, all modes, reporting the contents of the cargo coming to the United States prior to it leaving the foreign port, or at least 4 hours before the airplane lands, or at least 1 hour before the truck arrives at the border. And that's all considered normal now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I remember I remember vividly, when some of these laws and regulations were being discussed and passed, that the concerns that were raised by the industry, not only shippers but all the different carriers, in terms of how we're actually going to accomplish this. And I always joked from the standpoint that one of the best things for any technology company is regulations and laws, because when companies need to comply, and they need to look at technology to kind of help them do it, comply in a cost efficient and an automated fashion, that drives demand for for technology. And like you said, I think today it's kind of part of just doing business, because the processes were able to be developed, and the technology came on board to help companies meet those challenges. Talking about the import security filing, which is one of the things that you mentioned, I know it was more commonly referred to as 10+2 when it came out, and again, it was one of those things that a lot of discussion took place when it was first discussed and kind of started getting rolled out maybe about 5 years ago. For those people that might be watching today or on demand and might not be familiar with ISF or 10+2, can you give us a quick overview of what the requirements are, and are most shippers and logistics service providers in compliance today? And then one of the big things that I know I've been seen in the news is that ISF, that Customs is beginning to, they have announced that they're going to fully enforce ISF starting July 9th. Just kind of curious, what does that mean and what are the implications?
Well, I think, first of all, the importer security filing is I would say, the fourth leg of the stool, right? If you followed Ocean AMS, Air AMS, Truck ACE, and now ISF filings, It's the newest of the programs. It requires, as the law is written, it's exactly what it says. It's the importer is responsible for filing these 10 data elements in advance, 24 hours in advance prior to the vessel sailing. It's only an ocean requirement at this time. And it's the importer that would be fined if some kind of violation happened. Well, the National Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association, during this last few years when this was all being put in place, did an excellent job of lobbying customs to be able to control the ISF filing. So last we looked, about 97% of all ISF filings are actually done by the importer's customs broker, not by the importer themselves, even though the importer is responsible, right? So it's kind of a, it's a trust relationship between the importer and their broker to be able to empower them to file the ISF in a timely manner. And it makes sense because that customs broker has to file the entry anyway. And the data set for an entry is very similar to the data set for an ISF filing. So I can see why it turned out that way. What's about to change on July 9th is that Customs has finally said, we're going to start to issue penalties for non-compliance. So what's non-compliance? Well, non-compliance could be you filed on time and you put in your bill of lading, and the carrier bill of lading, like say it's without getting too technical, you have what they call direct shipments, which are done by the carrier on the carrier's master bill of lading. And then you have what they call house bill shipments, which are usually done by a foreign overseas forwarder or non-vessel operating carrier, right? So those all have to be filed in ISF, and those two numbers, the master bill of lading and the house bill of lading, need to match with the AMS filing that was done by that foreign NVOCC. So the biggest problem we see is not that people don't think they're filing on time, is that they file, they get the accepted message back from Customs, so they say, hey, I'm good, but their bill of lading does not match up with the carrier's bill of lading. And what that does, what Customs sees that as a non-filing, like it does not exist, because the bill of lading number you put in does not match what the carrier did. So therefore, there's nothing for Customs to see that says that that bill of lading was filed on your behalf. When we look through our data, the Descartes data set, there is enough of those that are not compliant that we've reached out to our customer base. We've told them that they need to remember what their job is. They need to look a little bit more in detail at what they're doing so that they get these bill ladings to match. So that's one instance where it's pretty easy to fix. You just have to have the right bill lading number to get the match, and you'll be so that's the biggest problem that exists today. The next would be an improperly filed ISF. So you file line items that require the first 6 digits of the harmonized tariff code to be on the line item for each commodity that you ship into the U.S. Are those commodity codes correct, and will they line up properly when the customs broker does the entry? So that's a secondary non-compliance. So Customs has announced, given us years to get this down to where we're comfortable doing it. So I don't think anybody should be surprised that they're finally going to actually measure it and issue some fines if people continue to ignore the rule.
Yeah, great examples there, Kevin. It strikes me that that there's 2 key things here. Number one is the importance of data quality and the ability for all the different parties that are involved in a cross-border shipment to be kind of on the same page when it comes to the sharing of data and information, so that those data elements, as you said, are all kind of aligned and synchronized. And secondly, that there needs to be a lot of continued collaboration and trust between the importers and their logistics service provider partners, the customs brokers or freight forwarders and so forth, because and it seems like this is the case where they're taking the primary responsibility to do the filings, get the data together, but the fines and the compliance is really up to the falls on the responsibility of the importer.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening now when you look at the data quality issue that you brought up is, I think if you're an importer of record in the United States at this point in time, you probably have the message that the responsibility lies with you to make sure that the quality of the data you're supplying to the broker is in line. And I think if you look over time, what's happened is, years ago, before the security filings were in place, the broker was really empowered to do all of the things that were required to be reported to Customs and Border Protection. Now you can see with the implementation of the importer security filing, Customs is really trying to say to those importers, hey, you're really responsible for this data set too. You can't just abdicate the throne and make this your broker's problem, because the broker's not the one that's going to get the fine, right? So if I were to give any advice to importers listening in on this call, is it's really important for you to understand at a part number level, what you're bringing into the United States, and I'm sure later we'll talk about the trends that happen globally. But it's really important to understand what by SKU or part number, what you're bringing into the United States, what is the proper harmonized tariff code for that part number, and that you control that data and share that with your broker. All right. And it has to be a partnership between the broker and the importer to make sure that all of your goods are properly rated. If you do that and you do it early, when it comes time to comply with these customs and security filing regulations, you're way ahead of your competition. You already understand what you're bringing into the country, and then therefore you have this head start. And at this point, your head start period's over. If you haven't already done that, you really need to get actively involved now so that you don't get fined.
Great. Well, let's move on to kind of I always joke a little bit sometimes that a lot of these global trade and compliance, it's a little bit of alphabet soup. There's so many acronyms, involved, global trade and compliance. So let me move on to another kind of program that's kind of getting a little bit of attention as well, which is the Air Cargo Advanced Screening, pilot program, ACAS. Briefly, what is ACAS? Why is it important, and who does it involve? And what's currently the status of the program? Any lessons learned? Things like that.
Oh, sure. We could talk a little bit about ACAS. ACAS is a little unusual in that it's typically what happens is you'll have a ruling. It'll show up in the Federal Register. There'll be an amount of time before that ruling gets put in place, and this is kind of a variance of that. If you think about ACAS, it's kind of like ISF, but for air shipments, right? And it really originated, if I'm sure most people remember the shipment out of Yemen. I think it was a printer cartridge being sent to a synagogue in Chicago. And when you just think about that, shipping a printer cartridge from Yemen to a synagogue in Chicago, to me, that would be definitely a shipment I would want to look at, right? But that kind of was the wake-up call that, hey, wait a minute, these small packages that are flying on airplanes, and they could have passengers in the airplane as well, right? They're not just cargo planes. So that kind of said, hey, there's a need to understand a little bit more about this, these types of shipments in advance. So after that happened, ACAS got announced as a voluntary program, okay? So initially, the carriers themselves are sending advanced shipment data into the customs targeting system, so customs has a clue when it comes to air freight what they might want to be stopping from getting on the plane or getting into the United States at the least. From that pilot, the industry said, well, or customs said, I'm really not getting what I need to know about these shipments early enough. Who knows that? Well, it's not the carrier, believe it or not. It's typically the forwarder or the person shipping the small package on the airplane. They know what they're shipping, but the carrier doesn't know that until it's too late. So ACAS now enables forwarders to be able to send in advance the description of the cargo that they're planning to ship air freight. That can get run through the targeting system, and then therefore, hopefully, CBP can identify these high-risk shipments ahead of time and get to them. So what makes it different is there are forwarders, carriers through Descartes participating in this program right now, and Customs is learning what the good parts and the bad parts of the implementation are, but it has not been announced in the Federal Register yet. So if you read, if you go on the internet and you look up ACAS and you kind of go through all of the discussions about it, you'll find that they expect it to become a requirement, but no deadline in place as of yet. Our customers are using it now. They're testing it. It'll roll out whenever that Federal Register gives us the 90-day notice or more, hopefully, and then we can get the whole industry involved. But as far as Descartes is concerned, we're in good shape. We've been involved in that from the first time we could.
Now, some of the I'm just kind of trying to get a sense of, so it's a voluntary program right now, so it's not mandatory. Are the leaders in the industry involved right now? I mean, I'm trying to get a sense of how much participation has been in the pilot program. Is it kind of the key leaders?
Yes. Without mentioning specific company names, you can consider the big air freight forwarders in the United States that are our customers are involved today. They're filing. They're part of the program with Customs. So yes, the larger guys are. I would say smaller air freight forwarders have not engaged it yet, and I'm not quite sure there's any pressure for them to do this yet. They should be aware of it. As soon as this Federal Register notice occurs, then they should be ready to react quickly. If you did want to get involved at this point, we can help you do that, and get you filing this advanced information in advance. Customs would like to see a broader base of filers than just the big guys that have adopted early. So that's kind of where that's going.
Great. Well, we talked about ISF. We talked about ACAS here, which tend to be kind of U.S. Kind of centric. Obviously you work with global clients and customs agencies around the world. Can you give us a sense of maybe some examples of other initiatives or programs that are taking place in other parts of the world related to cargo security and compliance?
Sure. Well, the U.S. has kind of been the leader as far as setting the kind of requirements for what a global or a country-specific security inbound filing system would work. So first you cover, your highest volume, which would be ocean. Then you go to your highest risk, which should be air. Then you roll in your highway portion, and then you kind of top it off with making the importer responsible for the line item detail. So the U.S. has kind of gone through those four legs of the stool. Canada, our closest trading partner, has followed us, okay? So We came out with Ocean AMS, they came out with Ocean ACI. We came out with Air AMS, they came out with Air ACI. That we came out with the cross-border highway truck security filing, they came out with their ACI highway program, which is just now mandatory, and no fines yet on the Canadian truck side, but that will come shortly. And then Canada has planned an ISF-like program that will be their fourth leg of the stool, right? So that's kind of, if you look at Canada and the US, almost the same. Canada has made it just a little bit different, so we can't use the same code over again, right? So, and have just enough nuance in how they want it done so that they're, you know, that they have, they're not exactly like the US, just similar. The next, the EU has put in a program for both import and export for security reasons. Currently, that's being done by carriers only, so there's no involvement yet with the forwarders or the actual importers or exporters. I think you could see the trend if you follow US and Canada. The trend will be at some point the Europeans will reach a little deeper down into the supply chain and have others participate so they can also receive the proper description of the merchandise prior to it shipping, because they really don't get that today. Then you have Japan, which is the Japan 24 initiative. They will be accepting, that's a kind of a mirror of Ocean AMS. So again, Japan starting with the ocean, highest volume number of shipments into Japan. Data set is similar to what we have to file for ocean. You know, who's the consignee, who's the shipper, where's it being delivered to, what's a description of the merchandise. The timing is similar, but where Japan has countries that are really close, like South Korea, their timing, instead of just a solid 24 hours prior to vessel loading, they've actually adopted a timing by port. So it's a little bit different, but similar. And then, so they're like the first Asian country that's really opened up a program that Descartes can be involved in to be able to service that. We're the first ones in the door there, working with Japanese customs, that they'll be issuing their ID, or what they call, like, kind of what we would call a SCAC code for MBOCC. There's a corresponding equivalent in Japan that they will issue you a code so that you can file the Japanese JP24 filings for your ocean freight. We're going through that process. In August, they'll start issuing those. They want to be live towards the end of the year or the beginning of 2014.
Great.
So that's kind of globally, you can see there's a lot going on.
Absolutely. Now, you did mention that there's some kind of differences between each country and what they're doing. Is there any kind of effort to, you know, harmonize kind of the processes across the different customs agencies around the world, considering that, you know, we are in a kind of a global, you know, trade environment, or you know, is that part of the challenge in terms of trying to comply with different requirements that different customs agencies have?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't have a lot of experience with what goes on in, like, the World Customs Organization or some of these global forums in which they discuss these things. Like, my opinion is that, you know, each country wants to kind of put their own stamp on their security filings. So although they remain similar, they will continue to have their own country-specific nuances. It's a challenge for someone like Descartes to kind of match up with all those things, but it's both good and bad. It's hard to do, so therefore it gives us, you know, some competitive advantage against other companies in the business. So I don't think we'll get to a truly harmonized global security filing standard in my lifetime, but I think they'll remain similar and kind of have the same focus. So I guess that's about all I could say on that one.
Great, great. Well, let's kind of circle back and talk a little bit about, the technology. When I look at this, obviously technology plays a key role in terms of automating, some of these processes in terms of the information exchange. And I view connectivity, being able to connect, all the different parties that are involved with all of this, customs, the freight forwarders, customs brokers, the importers, so on and so forth. As part of this. So, to me, technology and connectivity are critical, elements of this. And, certainly that's an area that you focus on. So as shippers, importers, exporters, and logistics service providers are looking for solutions, I mean, what are some of the high level attributes they should be looking for in a solution?
Well, I think, because of what you described, there's a lot of different parties to the supply chain, right? So you have carriers, you have buyers, sellers, you have people stuffing containers, you have warehouses, you have banks, you have all these different parties that are involved in the movement of goods, trucking companies, right? So you just have maybe 10 different people touching cargo, as it moves in whatever mode, whether it's ocean, air, or truck, or rail, through the supply chain. So that when you talk about all those different people, each entity typically will have their own system, right? So, and then each system has its own strengths and weaknesses. So there's where you really, someone like not only Descartes, but someone like a Descartes who has this, what we call this global logistics network, where all of the carriers are connected to us, all of the airlines are connected to us. 680 of the freight forwarder customs brokers in the United States are our customers. 80% of the U.S. market, of the Canadian customs brokers are our customers. We're large in Europe. In fact, we just did a recent acquisition of a company in Europe that supplies, compliance software over there. So our advantage really is we already have, and I think the number thrown around is 63,000 connected parties that exist in this Descartes network. So when you go to solve your business problem, at least we have the scope of size and the financial stability to be able to solve these problems where some other companies don't. So I think no matter who you choose, you have to make sure that they have all these connections in place and that they have the financial strength and the scope of all the different products. If you think about just what you and I have talked about today, there's many security filing products, and then it's now become global. So you can't really just do business with someone who only solves the problem on a country by country basis, if you're a global forwarder or a global shipper.
It seems to me that because a lot of these, requirements are continuously changing and new regulations are put in place. I mean, part of the challenge and part of what's required is really, keeping a pulse and staying, ahead of all these, changes in whether it's information that's required or, technology that's required, moving to electronic filing, for example, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's a challenge. There's no doubt about it. You can have 3 or 4 different initiatives moving at different speeds, right? Like we do now. And you got to kind of keep up with them and be ready to have, because one of the things that happens is and it's a shame in a way, is that when you asked about ACAS and early adopters and, how many people are involved, well, there should be more people involved. But, there's like a mixed message to the industry. Do I get involved early, right? And apply my resources now? Do I wait until the very last minute so all these other people that have applied resources early have solved all the early problems and I come in at the end and slide in? And, I would recommend that, being too early is not necessarily a great thing, and being too late is definitely not a great thing. Because in Canada is a good example. When they put their cross-border truck deadline in place, 80% of the trucking companies had not complied. And then, this mad rush happens both within Descartes and within Canadian Customs, and Canadian Customs can't handle the volume. So they have to back off on the implementation date, right, in order for them to catch up. So if my recommendation to anybody wanting to get involved in these is kind of pick a middle ground. Do not be late, because then what happens is, you're seen as waiting to the last minute, and then it becomes a real struggle for both the companies you're dealing with, the governments that you're dealing with, and yourselves, because you come into the game so late.
Great advice, and that kind of leads me to kind of the last question here to kind of wrap it up. What advice would you give to shippers, importers, exporters, and logistics service providers with regards to cargo security and trade compliance? So in other words, how would you complete this statement? You've got a best-in-class cargo security and trade compliance operation if what?
Well, I think it's a two-part answer, right? So if I'm an importer in the United States, and my responsibility is, to provide, concise data, I would start with my part number database, right? I would start with, do I know every SKU that I bring into the United States? Do I know its tariff code? Do I know, how am I managing that process? Am I using a tool, like, for example, there's a company, Global Data Mining, and Customs Info, that Descartes works closely with, and they're like the pros at figuring out that part number database by country, and so that when the shipper provides data into the supply chain, it's already correct. Okay, and that's probably the key advice point is, if you're an importer, get control of your parts so that you know exactly what you're shipping, and by country what that means, right? So that would be the shipper side of the equation. If you're a 3PL, freight forwarder, that kind of entity assisting, you're getting paid by these guys, then what you need to do is make sure you have that electronic capability to receive that data from them, whether it's in a purchase order or a commercial invoice, be able to bring that into your system and then use that to do all of the filings, the AMS filing, the ISF filing, the import forwarding creation, and the customs brokerage. And if you can wrap all that data up in a nice tight package so that you solve those 4 problems, your supply chain's going to run a hell of a lot smoother, and you're going to have a lot less inspections, and everything's going to be go your way, so to speak. So that would be my advice. Get control of that lowest level part number, SKU level detail, so you really understand it and can distribute it electronically to your trading partners.
Great advice, Kevin. I completely agree. I think that's one of the areas, particularly companies that have very large product portfolios, a lot of large bill of materials, where they're introducing new products all the time, where they may have products that might be licensed or have other requirements. Kind of getting those products classified correctly, really is kind of the prerequisite to really preparing yourself for all the processes that we've talked about, all the programs that we talked about today. And I think in the course of this conversation, I think we've kind of brought out how complex and all the different moving pieces that are involved in moving product across borders. So Kevin, thank you very much for your time today and for your insights on this topic, and certainly look forward to hopefully speak to you again in a future episode.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Adrian, for having me. Hopefully, some of the points we raised were useful to somebody. Anyway, thank you so much.
Great, and I want to thank everyone who joined us today. We didn't get any questions live, but if you've got a question for Kevin, you can go to the talkinglogistics.com website and find this episode and post a question there, and either Kevin or myself will be happy to answer it. Again, thank you very much for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.